welcome to America's Future. My guest today is Heidi Peterson. She is the president of International Research Council, and she's here from Miami visiting, and her subject is going to be the conflict in the Middle East and between the Middle East and the United States. Welcome to Windham, New Hampshire, Heidi. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, well, let's start off and ask you then, how did this project evolve?
Well, I'd like to give you a short history of how the conflicts began.
Okay.
In 1979, the USSR invaded Afghanistan. The U.S. supplied assistance provoked by Congressman Charlie Wilson, backed by a group of Texans with oil interests and who are ultra-right Christian conservatives with anti-communist views.
I remember that. I saw that movie. You've seen the movie, right?
Charlie Wilson's War, yeah.
Right? And I read the book. So, all right. Well, now, how was this assistance from the ultra-wing conservatives supplied?
Well, it was actually supplied through the U.S. government and the CIA to President Zia-ul-Haq, who coordinated with the ISI, who's the secret intelligence agency of Pakistan, to fund the Taliban, the Mujahideen, and Al-Qaeda, with money also coming from Saudi Arabia and weapons, training, and finance from America. The Mujahideen came from many Gulf states to fight the communists. Osama bin Laden led them in jihad, the Islamic Holy War. In Yemen, in 1980 to 1990, they supplied fighters with the state help of Al-Moyed, Al-Zindani, and Al-Ahmar. Al-Ahmar is the head of the Yemeni military. In 1981, Hunt Oil received its contract in Yemen for Marib oil. The war lasted 10 years, and in 1989, the Soviet Russia was defeated. In 1990 to 1991, Iraq attacked Kuwait, and the Gulf War started. Saddam Hussein had threatened Saudi Arabia. Saudi hired U.S. troops to protect them against Saddam Hussein, which made the Islamic Mujahideen fighters angry because they wanted to protect Saudi Arabia. And they were also angry because they didn't want America's military near to their holy sites. So in 1994, North Yemen had a war with South Yemen. South Yemen was communist, led by the Yemeni Socialist Party. The war united the country, and both north of Yemen was supported both by Osama bin Laden and the United States of America.
You know, earlier in the introduction, just before we go on, I have my next question here, but you have some Yemen credentials. Did you want to mention those?
Yes.
And also that you speak
Arabic.
Fluent Arabic, right?
Yeah, mostly Yemeni dialect, actually.
And so what are your credentials from Yemen, or how?
Well, I used to live in Yemen.
Okay.
And that's how I became personally involved in the conflict.
Okay.
And I know that Al-Ahmar family, who has worked alongside the United States and is accused of working with Osama bin Laden, supplying him with fighters.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this then. How did Osama bin Laden support the war?
Well, according to Western intelligence, before the war, Ali Mohsen Al-Ahmar, the brother of President Saleh, received $20 million from bin Laden to help settle Arab Afghan fighters in the country. When the war breaks out, the military commander deployed the fighters in the war's final battle over the South's capital of Aden. And despite the socialist tendencies, Saudi Arabia supported the South in order to keep Yemen divided as a weaker state bordering theirs. After the war, the radical fighters settled in Yemen and used it as a base. The conflict started becoming apparent in 1995 when the U.S. started participating in renditions under the Clinton administration.
Okay, can you define or explain, what is rendition? I think it has something to do with prisoners or something.
Yeah, renditions are pretty much capturing prisoners as extrajudicial. They're transferring the persons from one state to another, and it implies sometimes that torture, and some of these prisoners were murdered.
Okay, Heidi, you just talked about rendition. I wonder if you could explain the definition of rendition and how that works.
Yes. The term is used by some critics to describe the situation in which the U.S. has purportedly transferred suspected terrorists to countries known to employ harsh interrogation techniques that may rise to the level of torture. This violates Geneva Conventions. The first U.S. rendition of Islamists to Egypt takes place in 1995 and 1998 with the case of Talat Fuad Qassem, the so-called Tirana cell, respectively. U.S. CIA Director George Tenet has said that the CIA took part in over 80 renditions before September 11th, and press accounts suggest 100 to 150 suspects were flown to foreign countries. The U.S. Congress has codified the U.S. obligations under Article 3 of the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhumane, Degrading Treatment or Punishment into law. It shall be policy of the United States not to expel, extradite, or otherwise effect involuntary return of any person to a country in which there is substantial grounds for believing the person would be in danger of being subjected to torture, regardless of whether the person is physically present in the United States. But later, President Clinton issued a presidential decision directive which explicitly authorized the return of suspects by force. Returned suspects by force may be effected without cooperation of the host government, consent with procedures outlined NSD 77, which shall remain in effect. This outline, then later the policy was reiterated to a new directive, PD 62, which program contains apprehension, extradition, rendition, and prosecution. And this document created the National Coordination for Counterterrorism and the National Security Council. So these renditions also angered the Muslim community and the Mujahideen because before, as you know, that the Mujahideen had fought alongside with America to defeat the communists, and then later, although those fighters had maybe become extremists, the Americans had gone and removed them because they were considered terror threats for other nations. They had removed them and shipped them to places like Egypt, where some of them were tortured and some of them were killed. So,
are they still doing this today?
Well, the Guantanamo Bay is an example of those types of prisoners.
Okay.
And actually, which is coincidental, is Guantanamo Bay has returned a lot of their prisoners, but the ones they haven't returned are the ones from Yemen. They have the most prisoners from Yemen there. And I think that's because the U.S. cannot resolve its conflict with Yemen, and that's why they're keeping their citizens captured.
All right. What were you doing in Yemen that precipitated your involvement in this conflict?
Well, I was working for Deloitte & Touche, which is an accounting and consulting firm. Okay. And Deloitte & Touche was working on a project for a telecommunication company called Sabaphone. Sabaphone is, the chairman of Sabaphone is Hamid Al-Ahmar. Hamid Al-Ahmar is the son of Abdullah Al-Ahmar, the Speaker of Parliament, the head of Islah Islamic Party, whose brother is Ali Mohsen Al-Ahmar, the head of the Yemeni military. These people have become on the blacklist of America's, I don't know, CIA blacklist, I suppose. And at that time, I had met them personally.
Mm-hmm. Are they still active in Yemen? I mean,
yeah, they have the government. The president of Yemen is the brother.
okay.
So they're actually in charge of the government of Yemen.
So what happened during this time in Yemen?
During this time, the U.S. military came in and the CIA. And the CIA, under the direction of Donald Rumsfeld and Paul Wolfowitz, took a Predator drone aircraft and bombed a car, which was a significant point in the war because there was no war declared against Yemen and it was a violation of their sovereignty. But later came out that President Saleh had cooperated with the U.S. military. I had been interrogated by the CIA when they tricked me into interrogation, the U.S. military had, and they are very brutal, but they also accused this Al-Ahmar family of being Al-Qaeda.
Right, so you're saying you were interrogated by the CIA?
Yes, in
Okay.
Yemen.
Okay,
In
Yemen?
Yes, in the embassy.
Okay.
And this was surprising because they were, it's the president's brother. And I didn't have any history of Yemen politics at that time. So it looked like, because of the accusations and because of some of the military involvement, that the U.S. might have been aiming to remove the Yemen government as they had done the Taliban. And I think that the Al-Ahmar family suspected that. When they had bombed that car, they claimed that those were militants. There were 5 people in the car, yet none of them had been taken to court or proven guilty of any crime. And then later, 3 Christian missionaries were killed, and it was suspected that was a retaliation. Then the U.S. had 500 troops outside of Djibouti, and I believe at the time Al-Ahmar said that if they had entered Yemen, Yemen will eat them alive. But soon afterwards they had to go to Iraq because they were planning on removing Saddam Hussein and the Ba'ath Party. So anyways, all these war conflicts, have great violations of the Geneva Conventions, yet the United Nations and the other powers never got involved in any of it. Maybe they had written something or some report, but nothing, there was no upholding of any justice. And when I called the United Nations and told them that citizens were harmed between the belligerent acts of 2 states, they did not want to be involved because they said that they do not get involved in the U.S. conflicts with others.
All right. Before I ask you about some other conflicts, let me ask you: are you let's say a bona fide mediator for Yemen? I mean,
I have contracts with them I have a contract with their government, and I have contracts with DPMC, which is Dequan Petroleum Minerals, and that's the chairman of that is Ali Mohsen Ali Al-Ahmar.
so you could actually mediate, or what?
Yeah, I can mediate for them.
For Yemen, between Yemen, let's say, and the United States.
Yeah, primarily dealing with this family and the Islah party, because that's where a lot of Yemen doesn't have a conflict with the United States. It's mostly this Islamic party.
Okay. So what other conflicts in the Mideast are you interested in?
I'm interested in the conflict in Sudan because that conflict happened when Islamic parties were funneling money into Sudan to support the Sudan's Islamic Party. And the reason why I believe that is because at one time in the news, well, besides the things that I've heard, but also in the news, the Sudanese said that if Iraq was going to open one door of hell for America, we would open 7. But that quote soon disappeared out of the media, and the story was created to say that Sudan was making a racial genocide because they hate black people. But the Sudanese themselves are very black, the Arabs who are Sudanese, at least by their skin tone. So I thought that was just propaganda. And then this conflict, even though it was created for a different reason, it's sort of been sustained because it's subsidized by foreign oil interests that coming into Sudan, because Sudan has a lot of oil and China and other countries are buying that oil. And therefore, it's in their interest to keep the conflict.
Now that we're talking on the big subject of oil, which interests everybody, how else was America's oil interest affected by these conflicts?
Well, later, Hunt Oil lost their contract with Yemen. And it turns out Ray Hunt, who's the owner of Hunt Oil, sits on the National Petroleum Council and an industrial advisory board to the Secretary of Energy and the President's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board, whom President Bush selects himself to advise him on intelligence. And he is the owner, as I said, of Hunt Oil and works on the board of Halliburton, PepsiCo, and CSIS think tank. His oil agents, meaning those who worked with him in Yemen, they have agents that represent foreign corporations in Yemen, is Dekwan Petroleum and Mineral Services Company. And the chairman of that is Ali Mohsen Al-Ahmar, the head of the Yemeni military, who the U.S. accuses of Al-Qaeda, of working for Al-Qaeda. That man and his family are not happy with the United States, and his responsibility in his military was violated when the U.S. attacked their country because they are responsible for the sovereignty of their nation. And as well as that, they're not happy about being called terrorists and feeling that their lives are threatened. And they believe that Ray Hunt is behind Bush in these actions because of Ray Hunt's strong position with the Bush administration. So the gossip in Yemen is that Al-Ahmar became angry with them and then refused to continue the contract even after President Saleh had accepted to extend the contract after it expired its 20 years contract.
So the Hunt Oil Company is not drilling, is that what we're saying, in Yemen, or not participating in?
I think they might have one block, 18 or something like that. I'm not sure what their drilling is, but their main oil company is finished, and they were trying to get back in, but...
Is that the type of thing that you could mediate? Is that what...
Yeah, I mean, it would be very difficult because of it's an intractable conflict,
Oh, no.
But, it depends on a lot of... Also, another thing about oil in the war is it depends on how things settle to determine who has the rights of these major issues, Whoever is the strongest parties, they win the rights over dividing the wealth of the lands.
Right. But, I mean, you as a mediator for Yemen, or which means that they would give you permission to mediate between, let's say, Hunt Oil and this family? Is that something that...
Yeah,
is that
sure.
wrong? Right.
But a lot of Yemenis say that they don't know if Hunt can repair their relationship.
Oh, okay.
But that's just general gossip again. You never know, because at the same time, we have to get into that Yemen's in the middle of a civil war, and Yemen needs assistance, and people will change, their minds under the right offers or conditions.
Okay.
As well as maybe if that family wasn't threatened as it was, they would be more willing to do business with Americans.
Okay, right. So what's being done about this problem then?
Oh, okay. Well, this is interesting because Hunt and Exxon, two United States oil companies, are taking this unusual tactic of filing arbitration proceedings against the government of Yemen for expropriating an oil-producing block with output. This block has output of more than $1 billion a year.
Who do they do this arbitration? I mean, this.
The International Chamber of Commerce in Paris.
All right.
And it's a rare instance of an oil company taking action against a sovereign nation.
Okay. Now, does Ray Hunt have other oil prospects considering his closeness to the administration and the war?
Yes, he's trying to get the oil from the Kurdish region of Iraq. It has been said that he signed an oil deal with Iraq's Kurdish regional government. Yet the government will have to approve, or Kurdistan will have to separate from Iraq as its own nation in order to fulfill the contract. But many people also have signed contracts with the Kurds.
Okay. They have oil over there, and that Kurds are not a nation.
No, but
they're part
are
of Iraq.
Yeah.
So, okay. So what is Yemen like as we speak right now, nowadays, as they say in English?
Yemen is having a really hard time. It's one of the most difficult times since Abdullah al-Ahmar came to power, because they lost a lot of their allies, being that they had a lot of Mujahideen fighters, and that this is an international war on terror and their Islamic country. So there's a Shiite militant group which is headed by a man named al-Houthi and probably funded from Iran or whoever in the Eastern Bloc, and they're making a civil war inside Yemen, and they want to take over President Saleh's government or regime, and to put it under Shiite control. It was part of their growing, aims of creating a Persian Empire and cornering Saudi Arabia.
So that's going on today, and does Al-Qaeda play any role in this?
Al-Qaeda mostly has been fighting in Iraq.
Right.
And they have mostly left the state of Yemen alone in the past. But I'd like to say about the intentions, according to the speeches of Osama bin Laden, when he mentions the corporate interests, he mentions Halliburton, which is part of those corporations I mentioned earlier, and of the Bush administration. And he mentioned that he was going to drag the U.S. into a war to exhaust their financial resources and send them into bankruptcy, as they did in Russia. And he calls it bleed until bankruptcy policy. But there's also a problem that many Gulf currencies are pegged to the U.S. dollar, so all of them are being hurt by his bleed until bankruptcy policy. Yet previously he had offered the U.S. a truce, and they did not accept. So I'm not sure what his intentions are today. According to an article written this month called Al-Wasat Interview with Al-Qaeda Information Officer, it describes a scenario where Al-Qaeda is aiding Yemeni military as a paramilitary force to fight the Shiite militants in this civil war.
Well, in your opinion then, Heidi, what do you think should be done?
Well, Bill, I've noticed from my in-depth research that this war doesn't really seem to be against all Americans or the West or freedom, nor against all the Muslims. I think this war is mainly a few group of people fighting each other, a lot of them from Texas and then some extremist Muslims, and it seems that everyone else is paying for it. So I think that America has a few options and little choice, because I think that the U.S. government and the extremists are stonewalling the needs of the people. But I would like to start with some of the options, which I think are the bad options.
Okay.
The first option, which is the current goal, is defeating Al-Qaeda, and then the Sunni Islamic extremists will be crippled, and states such as Yemen, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iraq, and Lebanon will be open for a way of Shiite militias to take power and create a Persian empire, which the U.S. will have to deal with in negotiation. This empire will threaten the security of Arabia, which the U.S. could try to conquer Saudi Arabia because they have a lack of military, but their success of that will be as maybe successful as what they've done in Iraq. And the other thing is that by this weakening of the Sunni state, they have also made Israel extremely insecure by Hezbollah and other Shiite militia groups that threaten Israel. And at the time of at this time, maybe if the U.S. wants to continue into war, I think that the economic system of the U.S. could become bankrupt. Also, negotiating with a Persian Empire power is not very strong. As we can see currently in Iraq, the Iranians have neglected and ended current talks for cooperation towards stability in Iraq. And Iran would like to control OPEC as well as the sale of oil to be changed into another currency besides the U.S. dollar, and this will economically weaken the United States. Now, the U.S. could attack Iran, which is one of their options that they're considering now, but this could lead us into a World War III or another Cold War. The U.S. could try to strengthen current governmental systems and try to allocate power to existing military leaders to resolve these problems with the extremists inside their own countries. But this also might not put the U.S. in any better of a position than when the U.S. started the war. So what I think is that the U.S. should decide on what it can salvage from the war and what it can afford in its strategy in the future.
Well, we're getting down to about 3 minutes, and I've got a few more questions, but I think what I'll let you do is wrap it up and sum it up for us, and maybe tell what your idea is, where we go from here.
Oh, okay. Well, I would like to work towards conflict resolution and mediation, towards, resolving these things about assets which people are fighting over, and also military control or whatever, restoring justice. I'd like the United States to support this project and try to reconcile their differences with those who they've continued to fight with for this many years, and not continue towards down the way of trying to annihilate them, because I don't think that's a possibility.
So they could use your expertise in this area, right?
They can use my expertise, but they can also use the help of working with people if they work out their problems between these specific people who are having these conflicts, realizing what the problems are, and trying to work them out, and putting pressure on the community to identify the problems instead of putting a mass blanket of blame on whole societies or groups of people.
All right, we're going to put up on the screen your contact information, which is John Buckley. He's here in the audience, and if people have questions, they can contact John, and comments and whatever.
Okay.
Sound good? Okay, is there any other closing remarks you have?
No, or I suppose so. I would really like it if the Hunt family could help me in facilitating on their end of resolving the conflict.
The Hunt family, right?
Yes.
Oh, okay. All right, very good. So with that, we'll thank you for coming up, sharing your views on a really international subject for sure, and maybe we'll continue this in another interview and cover some more issues. There's a lot more to cover here. Thank you very much for coming, Heidi, and I'd like to thank the cable studio, the staff, and the volunteers, and thank you, the viewer, for watching.